Hello, everyone. For centuries, the vast sea of grass stretched from the Carpathian Mountains to the shores of the Pacific Ocean. A world without kings, without walls, without borders. There, where the earth touched the sky, the only law was strength. The strength to ride, to fight, to survive. In that boundless world, a child was born, Temujin, son of Yesugei, heir to nothing but hardship. He was born beneath a sky heavy with dark clouds, as if the heavens themselves foretold the coming storm that would bear his name. Before he could walk, he already knew the taste of betrayal. His father was poisoned, his family cast out of their tribe, and he, his mother, and his brothers were left to starve in the snow. From a young age, Temujin understood that mercy was a luxury the steppe could not afford. He hunted mice to survive, drank from melting ice, and fought off wolves with his bare hands. But in those windless nights, when the fire died and the wind howled through the tents, something deeper awakened within him, a will harder than steel. He swore not merely to survive, but to conquer the very fate that sought to crush him. As the years passed, the steppe forged him into iron. He learned to read the faces of men as one reads the clouds, knowing who would be loyal, who would betray, and who would die. He mastered the strength of patience, the weapon of timing, and the fire of command. Every scar became a lesson, every betrayal, a step closer to power. And when the nomadic tribes fell into chaos, it was the boy once abandoned who rose to unite them. From the ashes of exile, he built an empire founded on loyalty and fear, an order born from chaos. The banners of 100 clans gathered beneath a single emblem, and the wind carried their oath of allegiance across the endless plains. He rode at the front lines, eyes fixed upon the horizon, heart bound to destiny. And when he spoke, men listened as though the sky itself had found a voice. From the darkness of solitude, Temujin built the greatest empire the world had ever known. His name crossed deserts, mountains, and centuries, spoken in both fear and reverence. He was the rider of storms, the unifier of nations, the wrath of the steppe. He was Genghis Khan, the man who made the world kneel. The man who would one day be known as Genghis Khan was born in the middle of the 12th century, near the upper valley of the Onon River, close to the sacred mountain Burkhan Khaldun in northeastern Mongolia. His birth name was Temujin, and he belonged to the Borjigin clan, a branch of the larger Mongol tribe, one among the many that roamed the harsh, endless steppes of Central Asia. His father, Yesugei, was a respected chieftain and warrior, descended, or so later chroniclers claimed, from Kabul Khan, the leader who had once united the Mongols briefly under a single banner. Whether this was truth or later royal propaganda matters little. Yesugei commanded men, horses, and fear, which on the steppe meant power. His sworn brother and ally was Togril, lord of the Kerit, one of the 5 great tribal confederations that dominated the Mongolian plateau. In the year 1160, Yesugei abducted a young woman named Ho-Lun, the wife-to-be of a Merkit warrior. The act sparked a blood feud that would burn for decades, shaping the destiny of generations. Yet from that union came 5 children, 4 sons and 1 daughter, and among them Temujin was the firstborn. The child's life began under both privilege and peril. By the time he could walk, he was already the son of a chief, yet not the sole heir, for Yesugei had other wives and older sons. Still, Ho-Lun, fierce and intelligent, ensured that her son learned the traditions of the warrior: horsemanship, archery, the hunt, and the silence of endurance. When Temujin was about 9, Yesugei arranged a betrothal with Bortu, daughter of Dai Se-chen, a chief of the Ongirat tribe. Such alliances were the lifeblood of the steppe, a web of promises that held clans together as much as any sword. Father and son journeyed across the desert for the ceremony. The match was accepted, but Temujin was required to remain with his bride's family until a proper dowry could be delivered. While he stayed among the Ongirat, Temujin learned the ways of trade, of diplomacy, and the rhythms of a people who balanced between nomadic life and contact with the rich southern empires of the Jin dynasty. For 3 years he herded, hunted, and listened, lessons that would one day prove as valuable as any battle. Then, in tragedy, came the turning point. During one of his campaigns, Ye Sugei dined with a group of Tartars who, bound by tradition, offered him hospitality and treachery. The wine was poisoned. Though he managed to send for his son, he died before Temujin reached home. The fall was swift and merciless. Without Yesugei, the family's followers deserted them. The Taichi-ud clan, rivals of the Borjigin, claimed leadership, and Holun and her children were cast out into the wild. From that day they were no longer chiefs, but beggars scraping by with fish traps and wild roots. It was then that Temujin began to harden. Hunger carved, resolve into his bones. Betrayal sharpened his will. He hunted small game, learned to steal from traps set by others, and watched how men bowed only to power. Yet even in poverty, conflict found them. Food was scarce, and his elder half-brothers, Begta and Belgutai, tried to dominate the younger sons. When Begta stole the food Temujin and his brother Karsar had caught, the 2 boys took up bows and killed him, a blood act that would haunt them forever. Their mother, Holun, raged not only at the loss of a son, but at the realization that her family's unity was breaking apart from within. Soon after, Targutai, leader of the Taichi-ud, used the murder as an excuse to hunt Temujin down. The boy, barely 14, was captured and enslaved, his neck locked in a wooden collar meant to humiliate him. Yet even in chains he did not bend. "You can cage a wolf," he later said, "but not its hunger." Weeks passed before he escaped, aided by a kind herdsman who saw in his eyes something unbreakable. From that night, Temujin no longer belonged to any clan. He belonged to destiny. When he found refuge again with his family, they had only a handful of horses left. But from those ashes, the boy who had once been prey began to hunt differently. Not for food, but for strength. Soon fate led him to meet Bo or Chu, the young herder who became his first brother in arms, a friendship born not of blood, but of loyalty. Together they rode to reclaim stolen horses and, in the process, reclaimed something greater: purpose. The boy who had been abandoned on the frozen steppe was beginning to rise, and though no one yet knew his name beyond a few scattered tents, the world would one day whisper it in fear and awe: Temujin, son of Yesugei, child of Holun, heir to no throne but the one he would carve for himself from the bones of empires. By the time Temujin reached his late teens, hardship had tempered him into steel. He had known hunger, loss, and exile, yet beneath the scars a will was forming, fierce and clear. The young warrior gathered around him a small band of companions, bound not by blood, but by loyalty: Bo or Chu, who had once saved his life; Jelmer, swift with both bow and wit; and Bortu, the woman promised to him since childhood, now grown into strength and grace. When Temujin returned to the lands of the Ongirat to claim Bortu as his wife, Her father, Dai Seichen, greeted him with cautious respect. The youth had no wealth to offer, no warriors at his back, but his eyes, dark, steady, unflinching, spoke of destiny. Bortu chose to go with him, not to comfort, but to struggle. Together they rode back to the north, where wind and war would test every vow. For a time, peace seemed possible, but peace never lasted long on the steppe. One dawn the sky split with thunder, hooves, shouting, smoke. The Merkit, still nursing the ancient wound of Yesugei's abduction of Ho Lun, had returned to take revenge. They struck swiftly and brutally. While Temujin fled with his mother and brothers, Bortua was taken, carried away into the night by riders who shouted her name as a prize of vengeance. For 3 days, Temujin did not eat. On the 4th, he rose. He went to Togril, lord of the Kerit, and spoke the old words of oath. "My father was your sworn brother. If that bond still lives, lend me your hand, not for conquest, but for justice." Togril, who saw in the boy a spark of his fallen comrade, agreed. He gathered his horsemen, and together they rode to war. Togril, the seasoned Khan, Temujin, the avenging son, and a third ally, Jamugar, the fiery young chief of the Jadaran clan, and Temujin's childhood friend. The campaign was swift and ruthless. The Merkit were crushed, their camp torn apart by arrows and fire. Bortur was found alive, though her captor's child already stirred in her womb. Temujin took her hand and said only, "You are my wife. What is yours is mine." He would raise the child, Jochi, as his own. Yet that act of mercy would one day divide his sons and his empire. In the aftermath, victory bound Temujin and Jamugar closer than ever. They swore the sacred oath of Anda, brothers in spirit, equals in war and in fate. Together they shared their horses, their food, their dreams. Jamugar, eloquent and ambitious, believed in the old steppe ways, rule through bloodline and tradition. Temujin, silent and deliberate, dreamed of something greater, an order not of clans, but of loyalty, where the strong would rise by merit, not birth. For a time, the two brothers rode side by side. They hunted together, feasted together, fought together. But beneath the surface, their paths were already diverging. In 1186, when Temujin was about 24, his growing power began to draw men from every tribe, outcasts, warriors, servants, men who sought a leader, not a lord. At a great gathering, they raised him upon a white felt carpet and proclaimed him Khan of the Borjigin. His rule was simple: obey, and you will share in glory. Betray, and you will vanish. But ambition breeds envy. Jamugar, hearing of the coronation, called his own assembly, the Kurultai of the 13 tribes, and there he too was declared Gurkhan, the universal ruler. The steppe could not hold 2 sons. The brothers met again, not as friends, but as rivals. At Dalan Baljut, their armies clashed in dust and thunder. Temujin's men, outnumbered and inexperienced, fought bravely, but fell in droves. Jamugar triumphed, and in his victory revealed the darkness of his heart. He boiled 70 captives alive in cauldrons, a warning to all who would follow his Anda. But cruelty breeds rebellion. As years passed, Temujin rebuilt his strength, forging an army not of tribes, but of disciplined ranks, tens, hundreds, thousands, men bound by code and purpose. He rewarded loyalty above blood, punished betrayal without hesitation. He had learned the steppe's oldest law: fear can command obedience, but justice commands faith. The winds of fate began to turn. By 1196, Temujin was strong again, strong enough to face Jamugar and to begin the long road toward unity. And from the smoke of that first great betrayal, the legend of Genghis Khan began to take shape, not as a man born to rule, but as one who forced the world to kneel through sheer, unyielding will. When the dust of Dalan Baljut had settled, Temujin was a defeated man, but not a broken one. He retreated into obscurity with only a handful of loyal followers, hunted by rivals, betrayed by kin, and forgotten by most of the steppe. Yet in silence he watched, learned, and waited. The years that followed forged not an outlaw, but a ruler. Between 1190 and 1196, while the great tribes fought endless feuds, Temujin began rebuilding from the ashes. He no longer trusted the old ways of clan loyalty. Blood ties had failed him too many times. Instead, he built something new, a system of discipline, obedience, and merit. Each man, whether noble or herder, would be judged not by birth, but by service. He divided his forces into units of 10, 100, and 1,000, Arban, Zuun, Mingan. Each commander answered not to his tribe, but directly to the Khan. This was no longer a collection of horsemen. It was an army. He rewarded loyalty with wealth and honor, but punished betrayal without mercy. Those who defied orders were executed. Those who disobeyed in battle were struck down before their comrades. Yet to the loyal, he was generous, dividing spoils equally, protecting the weak, forbidding the theft of women or horses within his ranks. In doing so, Temujin turned the chaos of the steppe into structure, and the wild sons of the grasslands into soldiers. By 1196, the Jin Empire of northern China began fighting the Tatars, ancient enemies of the Mongols. Temujin, ever pragmatic, offered his service to the Jin frontier commander. He led his riders with precision and crushed the Tatars in a string of devastating raids. The Jin rewarded him richly. The steppe rewarded him with fear. He used that momentum to restore old alliances. He helped Togril, the Kherate Khan and his father's sworn brother, regain his throne. He crushed the Merkit once more and broke the strength of the Taichud. With every campaign, more clans abandoned the old chiefs to join him, drawn by his justice, his victories, and his unshakable will. Among his growing band were names that would echo through history: Bo-Or-Chu, Gelmir, Jebe the Arrow, and Subehide, the young prodigy who would one day march to the gates of Europe. They called themselves the Men of Destiny, but power demands confrontation. In 1201, the tribes who feared Temujin's rise turned once again to Jamugar, his former blood brother. He was elected Gurkhan, the supreme Khan, of a coalition of 15 tribes. Their goal was simple: to destroy Temujin before he united them all. The war that followed was brutal. At the Battle of the Onon River, Temujin's forces, though outnumbered, fought with discipline that the steppe had never seen before. When a poisoned arrow struck Temujin in the neck, it was Gelmir who saved his life, sucking the venom from the wound until dawn. When the man who fired the arrow was captured, Temujin spared him and made him an officer. The man's name was Jebe, the Arrow, and he would become one of his greatest generals. The coalition fractured. One by one, the tribes bent the knee. Jamugar, abandoned by his allies, fled into the mountains. Years later, his own men betrayed him and brought him bound before the Khan. Temujin looked upon his old friend and said softly, You and I were once one mind, one heart. The steppe was not wide enough for both of us." He offered Jarmugar an honorable death. The old friend accepted. He was executed without pain, and Temujin mourned him in silence, for he had lost not just a rival, but the last tie to his youth. In 1203, betrayal struck again. Togril, the Keret Khan who once called Temujin his son, turned against him, driven by jealousy and the whispers of his own kin. Temujin was ambushed and nearly destroyed, his camp scattered to the winds. But he survived, regrouped, and struck back. At the Battle of the Black Forest he annihilated the Keret host. Togril fled into the mountains, where he was slain by bandits, his empire absorbed into Temujin's growing dominion. The Naiman, last of the great rivals, rose to challenge him next. In 1204, under Tayang Khan, they gathered their forces, vast and proud. Temujin ordered each of his men to light 5 fires at night, making his army seem endless. The Naiman scouts reported a force larger than the horizon itself. And when battle came, panic broke their lines before the first charge. By the end of that year, the Naiman were no more. Now the steppe was silent. For the first time in history, from the Altai Mountains to the borders of Manchuria, all the tribes rode under one banner. In the spring of 1206, at the great Kurultai by the Onon River, the lords of every tribe assembled. They raised Temujin upon a white felt carpet, and the shaman declared, "From this day forth he shall be called Genghis Khan, Genghis Khan, the oceanic ruler, whose power has no shore." The drums thundered, the horses neighed, and the steppe bowed to a single man. From the ashes of betrayal and exile, a new empire was born. The Mongol nation had risen, forged not by chance, but by will. And as the wind swept across the plains, carrying the name Genghis Khan, it whispered a truth the world would soon learn. The age of kingdoms had ended. The age of the conqueror had begun. The year 1206 marked not just the birth of a ruler, but of a commander who understood war as few men ever would. Standing before the assembly at the Onon River, the newly anointed Genghis Khan swore an oath that would define an age. The steppe shall no longer be ruled by chance or blood. From this day we will fight as one body, one mind, one soul. Genghis did not inherit a nation. He built one, and the foundation of that nation was the army. He reorganized his warriors into a system that mirrored the precision of nature itself. Each soldier belonged to an arban, 10 men. 10 arbans formed a zuun, 100. 10 zuuns made a mingan, 1,000, and 10 mingans formed a tumen, 10,000. This was not a tribal horde. It was an instrument of conquest, a living machine. Every man was accountable to his unit. If one fled, all 10 were executed. If one stood, all were rewarded. In this crucible of loyalty and fear, Genghis forged unity. He created a code, the Great Yasa, that governed both war and peace. It forbade theft, treachery, and the taking of women without consent. But above all, it demanded discipline. The Yasa was not law, it was order, and order was what gave the Mongols their greatest weapon: control. While other Khans fought with pride, Genghis fought with plans. He studied the movement of wind, the silence before storms, and the instincts of prey, then used them to design war. He emphasized mobility. Every warrior carried 5 or 6 horses and could ride for days without rest. They moved faster than any army before them, covering nearly 100 kilometers a day, a pace no infantry could match. He developed intelligence networks, sending scouts days ahead of his armies. When his enemies saw the Mongols, it was already too late. Genghis had seen them first. His armies used feigned retreats to perfection. They would charge, draw blood, and flee, making the enemy believe they had won. When pursuit began, the Mongols turned, encircled, and annihilated their foes in the open plain. He understood the mind of his enemies better than they did themselves. To the proud, he offered flattery. To the fearful, mercy. To the defiant, obliteration. In 1207, Genghis looked south, toward the western Shuya, or Tangut Kingdom, a rich but isolated state on the edge of the Gobi Desert. He did not invade blindly. He gathered intelligence first: maps, rivers, fortress designs, and trade routes. When the invasion began in 1209, he moved not like a barbarian, but like a general who had studied every grain of sand on the battlefield. His forces advanced in 3 coordinated wings, each striking from a different direction, a tactic unseen in steppe warfare. The Tangut, trapped between desert and mountain, tried to fortify cities. But Genghis refused to be drawn into a siege. Instead, he cut their supply lines, poisoned wells, and burned the crops around their cities, forcing them to starve behind their own walls. He used psychological warfare. Prisoners were released to spread tales of Mongol cruelty, of soldiers who rode with no need for food or sleep, who struck like thunder and vanished like wind. When the Tangut finally surrendered, it was not just to the sword, but to fear itself. Genghis accepted their tribute, horses, silk, and soldiers, then withdrew. He did not destroy the Tangut yet. He had tested his army, measured its strength, and seen how far discipline could reach. He now knew the Mongols could defeat kingdoms, not just tribes. Back on the steppe, Genghis refined his art. He appointed Mukhali, as his field marshal, a man who turned every order into precision. He elevated Subedai, barely 20, to command cavalry wings, and he personally oversaw drills, mock hunts where entire tumens would encircle herds, communicating only with flags and horns, rehearsing the maneuvers that would one day encircle armies. He told his generals, "Victory is not born from strength, it is born from the movement of strength." His empire was now a living weapon, every man a blade, every commander a hand, and he, Genghis Khan, was the mind behind it all. By 1210, the Tangut was subdued, the steppe was unified, and the armies of the Khan waited like storm clouds along the Great Wall. Their horses were restless, their quivers full. Ahead lay the Jin dynasty, the empire that once mocked the Mongols as savages. Now Genghis Khan would teach them that no wall could stop the wind. The campaigns to come, against Jin, Khwarezm, and the world itself, would make his name eternal. But here, in the quiet years after unification, the foundation had already been laid. A law, an army, a mind sharper than steel. The Jin dynasty, vast, ancient, and proud, had ruled northern China for over a century. Behind its great wall stood cities of stone, walls higher than any Mongol had ever seen, and armies numbering in the hundreds of thousands. To the scholars of Zhongdu, modern-day Beijing, the Mongols were nothing more than wind-born savages. Fierce, yes, but untrained, untested, and doomed to shatter against civilization's armor. But Genghis Khan had no intention of shattering. He intended to carve his name into the dragon's scales. When the Jin emperor refused to pay tribute, Genghis Khan summoned his generals. Around the fire, he laid out a plan not of fury, but of geometry. "The wall is not our enemy," he said. "It is the men who hide behind it. We will draw them out, as a hunter drives the tiger from its den." He divided his army into 4 tumens, 40,000 men each, and sent them along separate routes toward the border passes. Each column moved like mist, guided by spies who knew every gate, every river crossing, every weak stone in the wall. While Jin scouts scrambled to locate the main force, Genghis appeared where none expected. The Wugu Pass, a treacherous mountain road thought impassable for cavalry. There, in a thunderstorm, his troops dismantled wagons, carried supplies on their backs, and dragged siege engines up the cliffs. When dawn came, the guards at the pass looked down and saw an army where there should have been none. The Mongols swept through like a tide. The gate fell by noon. The road to China lay open. The Jin generals believed victory was still certain. Their armies were vast, their fortresses secure. But Genghis did not attack the strong. He isolated them. He sent riders deep into enemy territory, burning crops and intercepting caravans. Villages vanished overnight. Prisoners were released, carrying tales of Mongol demons who rode without rest, ate without fire, and feared neither death nor gods. In reality, it was logistics and deception. Genghis knew that terror spread faster than arrows and cost far less to maintain. When a Jin army of 70,000 under General Hushaho marched north to stop him, Genghis feigned retreat, his favorite weapon. His cavalry scattered into the plains, drawing the Jin in pursuit for days. Then, at the Battle of Yehuling, he turned. Hidden on the hillsides, Mongol archers unleashed a storm of arrows. The Jin formations, heavy with armor and banners, could not maneuver. When panic spread, the Mongols charged, silent, disciplined, unstoppable. By nightfall, the Jin army ceased to exist. Only the ravens remained. After Yehuling, the path to the Jin capital was open, but Genghis did not rush. He preferred patience to pride. He first cut the empire apart, severing the north from the south, capturing garrisons, and turning local warlords into allies through bribes and promises. His siege engineers, many Chinese and Khitan defectors, built catapults, mangonels, and siege towers. He adopted Chinese siegecraft faster than any outsider before him, even improving it with steppe mobility. By 1214, the Jin emperor fled from Zhongdu to Kaifeng, abandoning the northern capital. The city's defenders refused to yield. Genghis ordered the siege to continue. Month after month, stones rained down on the walls. The Mongols tunneled beneath towers, dammed rivers to flood moats, and built bridges of sandbags over corpses. Inside the city, famine began. Outside, the Mongols sang. When the gates finally fell in 1215, the soldiers stormed through like fire through dry grass. Zhongdu burned for days, its gold, silk, and sorrow all consumed in one roaring inferno. Genghis watched from a distance, silent. To him, this was not victory, it was confirmation. The Great Wall had failed, the dragon had fallen, and the world had learned a new truth. No empire built by stone can stand against the wind. The Jin campaign revealed everything that made Genghis Khan a military genius. He combined the mobility of nomads with the engineering of civilizations. He mastered intelligence networks, psychological warfare, logistical discipline, and command decentralization, allowing sub-commanders to act independently within a single, unified strategy. He turned chaos into method, he replaced rage with reason, and he made speed, not size, the measure of power. By 1215, his armies controlled all of northern China. The Jin had fallen back behind the Yellow River, their empire bleeding from 1,000 cuts. The Mongols returned to the steppe richer, stronger, and hungrier than ever before. The Khan stood at the peak of his triumph, but his gaze did not linger southward. It turned west toward a land of caravans and gold, where insult would soon ignite the greatest war of his life. The world had met Genghis the Conqueror. Now it would meet Genghis the Avenger. After the Chinese campaigns, Genghis Khan, Temujin, returned to the steppe crowned with victory. He ruled the land from the edges of Manchuria to the borders of Tibet, an empire vaster than any before him. And yet, in his calm eyes burned an unfulfilled vision. "The strong do not rest to enjoy victory," he said. "We pause only to see who is still standing." Beyond the Tian Shan Mountains, where silk roads wound through deserts and snow peaks, stretched the empire of Khwarizm, rich, pious, and proud. It was ruled by Shah Muhammad II, a king swollen with wealth and arrogance, who believed no wind from the steppe could ever reach him. In 1218, Genghis Khan sent to Khwarizm a caravan of 500 merchants, bearing silk, gold, and symbols of friendship. It was not an army, it was a gesture of peace. But in the city of Otrar, the Shah's governor seized the caravan, accused them of espionage, and had them executed. When word reached Karakorum, the Mongol capital, silence fell upon the great camp. Only the wind moved through the black banners. For days, Genghis Khan spoke to no one. Then he sent 3 ambassadors to demand justice. The Shah's reply was to shave their heads, behead one, and send the body back east. It was no longer an insult. It was a declaration of war. "He has cut the silk thread," Genghis said quietly, his eyes toward the west. "Then I shall answer with the sword." In the spring of 1219, Genghis Khan gathered over 200,000 men, the most disciplined force on earth. He divided them into 4 great armies, led by his finest generals, Jebe, Subedai, Tolui, and Jochi. They moved like wolves, separate when hunting, united when killing. They crossed the Kizil Kum Desert, drank water stored in leather skins, and navigated by stars and shadows. No one had ever attempted such a march. The scholars of the West thought no army could survive that wasteland. But they forgot. These were the children of the wind. The first force, led by Jebe and Jochi, struck from the north. Meanwhile, Genghis and Tolui drove through the heart of Khwarizm, heading toward the jewel of Islam. Bukhara. Bukhara was rich and radiant, its walls thick with pride and gold. The Shah believed no mortal hand could breach it. Yet in February 1220, the horizon darkened with dust, and within it rode the Mongols. In mere days, the city fell. According to the secret history of the Mongols, Genghis Khan entered the great mosque on horseback, climbed the pulpit, and said, "If you had not committed great sins, God would not have sent me as your punishment." That sentence echoed through the Islamic world, a sermon and a death sentence, both in one breath. Bukhara burned, but it was only the beginning. Samarkand, the crown of the Shah's empire, held more than 100,000 troops, Persian archers, Turkic cavalry, Chinese engineers. They outnumbered the Mongols 2-1, but Genghis Khan had weapons more powerful than numbers: speed, coordination, and fear. He ordered Subedai to encircle the city in multiple rings, severing every escape. Captured soldiers were forced into the front lines to absorb enemy fire, a psychological assault that shattered morale. When the defenders sallied out, Genghis feigned retreat, drawing them into the open plain. where his flanking cavalry crushed them like thunder. In 10 days, Samarkand fell. Shah Muhammad fled, abandoning his army, wandering through the desert until he died alone on an island in the Caspian Sea. "The king has fled," Genghis said coldly, "but his sins remain." After Samarkand, the wrath of the steppe rolled westward like a storm devouring the sun. Khiva, Urgench, Merv, Nishapur, cities that had flourished for centuries, were erased. At Merv, over 700,000 people were slain in 3 days. At Nishapur, where the wife of a Mongol commander had been killed, vengeance consumed everything. Persian chroniclers wrote, "Not even the cats were spared." This was no longer conquest, it was divine retribution, a message carved into the bones of empires. No one insults Genghis Khan and lives to speak of it. Behind the rivers of blood lay the mind of a strategist far ahead of his time. He divided his armies into autonomous units, each capable of fighting, scouting, and surviving alone, yet all synchronized by instinct and code. He used false intelligence, ambush, and mobility to break enemy formations before the battle even began. He absorbed engineers, scholars, and artisans from conquered lands, turning their knowledge into Mongol power. And above all, he understood that fear is the most efficient weapon ever forged. Genghis Khan did not merely win battles, he redesigned the concept of warfare itself. By 1221, the empire of Khwarezm had ceased to exist, its cities turned to ash, its rulers to dust. Standing amid the ruins, Genghis Khan gave no cheer, no triumph. He only ordered the dead to be buried, the survivors released, and the march home begun. "Heaven offered me silk," he said, "but I chose the sword." The empire of Khwarezm lay in ruins. Cities that once glimmered like jewels were now dust under hooves. Yet one man still haunted Genghis Khan, Temujin, the Shah, Muhammad II, who had fled his burning throne and vanished into the deserts of Persia. For the great Khan, unfinished business was an insult to heaven. He dispatched 2 of his greatest generals, Jeber, the Arrow, and Subedai, the Iron Marshal, with 20,000 riders and a single order, follow him to the edge of the world. It was not just pursuit, it was a test of endurance, strategy, and destiny. The Shah fled westward through Persia, hiding among fortresses and mountains, pursued by a shadow that never slept. Jebi and Subedai moved like ghosts, appearing from dunes, striking at night, vanishing before dawn. They captured every city that dared shelter the fugitive, demanding only one thing: "Where is your king?" From Rai to Hamadan, the Mongols followed his trail of fear. Finally, on the island of Caspian's shore, the Shah died, not by sword, but by fever and despair. When the news reached the Mongol generals, Jebi said quietly, "The man is dead, but the road west is still open." That road would lead them farther than any Mongol had ever gone, through the Caucasus Mountains, across the steppes of the Rus's Rus, and into the heart of Europe itself. Winter of 1221. The Mongol host approached the Caucasus, that colossal wall of rock and snow dividing Asia from Europe. Tribes who had never bowed to any king gathered to block the passes. Alans, Circassians, and Kipchaks united under one banner. The generals sent envoys bearing an offer: "Let us pass, and we shall leave you in peace." But the tribes trusted no strangers. The passes blazed with arrows. So Jebi turned to strategy. He sent gold and promises to the Kipchaks, whispering, "The Alans are plotting to betray you." Within days, the alliance broke. The Kipchaks withdrew, and the Mongols struck like thunder. The Alans were slaughtered. Then Jebe sent word to the Kipchaks again, "Come celebrate your victory." When they gathered, drunk with triumph, the Mongols fell upon them too. No mercy, no survivors. Thus the Caucasus fell, not by force, but by deception. "Divide, and the mountain will kneel," Subedé murmured. By 1222, the Mongols had descended into the wide plains north of the Black Sea, lands of endless wind and distant forests. Here lived the Rus's princes, the heirs of Kiev and Novgorod, fractured and proud. At first, the Mongols were a rumor, a storm at the edge of the horizon. They raided the Cumans, Kipchaks, who fled west, begging the Rus for help. "A fire comes from the east. If we stand apart, we will burn one by one." The princes listened and ignored them. They had quarreled too long to unite. But the Mongols were not raiders. They were scouts of apocalypse. Jebe and Subedé were mapping rivers, fortresses, and alliances, a reconnaissance campaign spanning continents. When the Rus finally gathered their armies, 12 princes, 40,000 men, they believed they were hunting invaders. In truth, they were walking into a design already drawn. The Mongols met the Russes near the Kalka River, Kalkar, a quiet stream winding through the steppe. The Russes outnumbered them 2-1, but numbers had never saved anyone from Mongol cunning. For 9 days, Jebe and Subedé feigned retreat, a masterful deception that stretched for hundreds of miles. The Rus, hungry for victory, broke formation, chasing the fleeing horsemen across the plains. Then, when exhaustion and arrogance had done their work, the Mongols turned. Hidden wings of cavalry emerged from the dust. Drums thundered, arrows blackened the sky. The Russes' ranks crumbled under precision fire, encircled, trapped, annihilated. Prince Mstislav of Kiev tried to rally his men, but chaos swallowed command. By nightfall, the plain was littered with corpses. The Mongols captured the surviving princes. According to Persian chroniclers, they laid them beneath wooden planks and held a feast atop them, crushing them slowly under their weight. "We do not spill royal blood," Subedé said coldly, "but we let it soak the ground." After the victory, Jebe and Subedé did not stay to rule. Their orders were simple: explore, terrify, and return. They turned south, crossed the Volga, and vanished into the steppe, leaving behind silence and ashes. To the Russes and Europeans, it was as if a storm had come and gone, a glimpse of something monstrous yet majestic. They did not know that this was only the bow being drawn. In the east, Genghis Khan received their report. He studied the maps of rivers and fortresses, the names of kings and cities, then said, "The bow is stretched. When my sons loose it, the world will shake." The campaign of Jebe and Subedé became a legend, the first Mongol expedition to Europe, the opening of a century-long arc of conquest. From their path came knowledge that would later guide the invasions of Batu Khan and Subedé into Hungary, Poland, and beyond. They had proven that no distance, no mountain, no nation could escape the will of the Mongols. They had carried the thunder of Genghis across 2 continents, and though Genghis Khan himself would never set foot in Europe, his shadow reached it, carried by the wind of his generals. He sent arrows instead of armies. A chronicler later wrote, "And the world trembled before the sound." And as the winds of the steppe howled across the deserts of Central Asia, the world learned a new truth. Fear travels faster than armies. In the spring of 1226, the steppe wind carried strange tidings back to Mongolia. While the great Khan's armies had conquered the west, The Tanguts of Xixia, the desert kingdom once subdued, had turned traitor. They had refused to send troops, refused tribute, and even dared to ally with the Jin dynasty, the ancient enemy of Genghis Khan, Temujin. For the old conqueror, it was an insult carved into stone. He had already ruled half the known world. Yet betrayal, that was something he never forgave. When his generals urged rest, he said simply, "A horse does not stop at half the mountain. It climbs until the peak breaks under its hoof." At nearly 65, the man who had united the tribes of the steppe once more took up the bow. His scars burned anew beneath his armor, reminders of every oath broken, every kingdom fallen. The storm was returning east. The Mongol army crossed the Gobi like an iron tide. From the front rode the elite guard, 10,000 men of the Keshig, each trained to kill in silence, their banners trailing smoke. Behind them, tens of thousands more, veterans from Khwarezm, archers from the forests of the north, engineers from China's captured cities. They carried no supply wagons. The land itself would feed them, or burn with them. The Tangut city of Heishui fell first. Its gates shattered under rams built from desert wood, its defenders shot before they could reload. Genghis ordered no quarter. The city was erased from the maps. "Mercy," he said, "is for those who keep faith. Treachery is repaid with silence." The message spread faster than his horses. The great Khan had returned, and this time he came not to conquer, but to punish. Every move of the campaign was planned like a chess match across mountains and rivers. Genghis no longer fought for land, he fought for obedience. His spies, the yam riders, who could cross 100 miles a day, sent messages from every corner of China. They carried orders sealed with the mark of the wolf, written in the Uyghur script he had adopted for his empire. The plan was simple: isolate Xixia, cut off Jin reinforcements, and destroy both. He divided his army into 3 wings. Tolui, his youngest son, moved south to encircle the Tangut capital. Subedai, led a cavalry corps east to raid Jin territory and sever supply lines. Genghis himself advanced through the Yellow River corridor, cutting down fortresses one by one. The Mongols used their greatest weapon, psychological warfare. They released captured Tangut soldiers, mutilated but alive, whispering, "The Khan is coming." Within weeks, entire cities surrendered at the mere sight of a black banner on the horizon. To win without fighting, Genghis told his generals, is the highest art of war. As Xixia burned, the Jin dynasty trembled. They had ruled northern China for more than a century, vast, ancient, and proud. But now the dragon's scales were cracking. Famine spread through their lands. The people murmured, the officials squabbled, and their armies, massive but undisciplined, had forgotten how to fight. From the plains, Genghis unleashed Subedai once more. His cavalry struck deep behind Jin lines, burning granaries, flooding rivers, and collapsing bridges. He didn't just win battles, he dismantled the enemy's will to resist. When a Jin commander asked why they spared no city, Subedai answered, "We do not fight walls, we fight the hearts behind them." Meanwhile, Tolui completed his siege of Zhongxing, the Tangut capital. The Mongols surrounded the city completely, cutting it off from water and trade. After months of siege, disease, and starvation, turned the defenders into ghosts. When an envoy begged Genghis to accept their surrender, he replied coldly, "Let them offer me their emperor in chains. then I will speak of peace. The year was 1227. The Tanguts, broken and starving, finally sent their ruler to the Mongol camp. Barefoot, trembling, bearing tribute and pleas, he bowed before the great Khan. Genghis looked down at him and said, "You chose rebellion, you chose death, but I will grant you the gift of dying under your own sky." The Tangut king was executed that same night. His capital was burned to the ground, every stone turned to ash. Yet as the smoke rose, so did a chill wind. During the campaign, the Khan had fallen from his horse, his ribs broken, fever setting in. His physicians urged rest, but he refused. He commanded the march continue until Xixia ceased to exist. Only when victory was absolute did he allow the banners to be lowered. He summoned his sons, Yochi, Chagatai, Ogede, and Tolui, and made them swear the old oath of the wolf. Never divide, never betray. The empire is one sky. Soon after, as the army rested along the Yellow River, the great Khan's breath grew shallow. Witnesses said he looked west, toward the lands he had conquered, and smiled. "The world," he whispered, "is too small for my dreams." He died in August 1227, under a sky heavy with dust. No tomb was built, no monument raised. His body was wrapped in felt and carried back to Mongolia under the cover of night. The funeral procession rode in silence. Every traveler they met was killed, so that none could tell where he was buried. Legend says that when they reached the sacred mountain of Burkan Khaldun, the soldiers killed their horses and themselves, sealing the secret forever. To this day, no man knows the grave of Genghis Khan. Only the steppe remembers. From a boy abandoned by his tribe, he had become the ruler of the largest empire ever forged by human hands. His armies had swept from the Pacific to the Caspian, from Siberia to Persia. He united the steppe, redefined war, and reshaped the world. But his truest conquest was not of land. It was of discipline, loyalty, and order among the wild tribes of the plains. He had turned chaos into empire, and though the man was gone, the storm remained, carried on by his sons and grandsons, who would soon march into Europe, fulfilling the prophecy whispered on the steppes. The bow has been drawn. The world will feel the arrow. The year was 1227. The sands of the Gobi were silent again, yet the sky seemed heavier, as if mourning the end of a storm. The great Khan, Genghis Khan, Temujin, lay in his tent, surrounded by the whispering banners of victory and the scent of death. His body, once carved from iron, was broken. A fall from his horse had crushed his ribs. Fever spread through his chest. Yet even in pain, his eyes burned with the same cold fire that had conquered half the world. His generals knelt before him, Tolui, Tolui, loyal and strong, Chagatai, Chagatai, proud and harsh, Ogede, Ogede, calm and measured, Jochi, Jochi, distant and dying in the far west. Around them hung the weight of empire, the fate of nations resting in the silence of one man's breath. Genghis looked at him and said, "The sky is eternal. The earth is patient. Be like both, or the wind will scatter what I have built." In his final council, the Khan spoke little, but every word fell like a decree of fate. He had watched his sons fight one another, each proud and eager to inherit the thunder. Now he spoke with the calm of the steppe. "Jochi is my eldest, but his shadow is long and uncertain. Chagatai has the fire, but fire consumes itself. Tolui has the strength, but strength must serve wisdom. Therefore, Ogede shall be great Khan." The tent was silent. Even the wind outside seemed to pause. Ogedei bowed deeply, tears falling on the dust. He knew his father was not merely naming an heir, he was defining the order of the world. "Rule not by fear," Genghis said, "but by the law of the steppe, swift, equal, and unbroken. Let every man, rich or poor, know his place beneath one sky." Then he raised his hand, trembling but steady, and whispered the last command. "Do not build me a tomb. Let the land itself guard me. When the grass grows over my bones, the world will remember the hoof prints, not the grave." When the great Khan died, a stillness swept through the camp, as if the earth itself refused to breathe. His body was wrapped in white felt, sealed with horsehair cords, and placed upon a black cart drawn by 8 stallions. Tolui led the procession north, across deserts, rivers, and mountains, back to the sacred heart of Mongolia. Burkan Khaldun, Burkan Khaldun. The riders were forbidden to speak. Every passerby was killed, every trace erased. No one would ever know where the eternal Khan slept. Some say the escort, 1,000 of his most loyal soldiers, slew one another upon reaching the mountain, their blood binding the secret forever. Others whisper that when they buried him, a sudden storm covered the valley in snow, as if heaven itself sought to hide its chosen son. "Only the steppe knows his tomb," the old chronicles say, "and the steppe does not speak." Months later, the Kuriltai, the great council of Mongol nobles, gathered by the Onon River. The banners of 100 clans fluttered in the wind. There, Tolui presented the will of his father. When Ogedei, stepped forward, the assembly bowed as one. The drums thundered like distant hooves. "From this day," Tolui proclaimed, "the sons of the eternal sky obey one Khan." The nobles swore their oaths upon horse blood and steel. The empire of the great steppe lived on, bound not by walls, but by loyalty and fear. And as Ogedei took the golden cup and poured milk to the sky, he said, "Father, you are gone from the saddle, but the reins are still in your hand." In the years that followed, his empire became the largest contiguous land empire in human history, stretching from the Pacific to the Black Sea, from Siberia to Persia, from China to the gates of Europe. Every Khan who ruled after him invoked his name. Every army that rode under the wolf banner carried his spirit. Even his enemies, Persians, Chinese, and Europeans alike, spoke of him with awe, fear, and reluctant admiration. He had changed not just borders, but the logic of war itself. Speed over size, discipline over birthright, loyalty over blood. He proved that an empire could be forged from wind and will. "The bow of the East," one Persian historian wrote, "had loosed an arrow that would never fall." And indeed, though his bones turned to dust beneath the steppes, his name, Genghis Khan, the oceanic ruler, still gallops through history, swift as the thunder of hooves, unbroken as the endless sky. And that was the full story. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Stories and Documents, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss any future episodes like this one. Thank you for watching, and goodbye for now.